Emily Chang, and this is the best of Bloomberg Technology, where we bring you all our top interviews from the week in tech. Coming up, markets saw a big lift after Donald Trump won the White House, yet most of Silicon Valley lost the bet on the U.S. presidency. We'll map out how the industry is planning for the next 4 years. Plus, what a Trump presidency means for some key issues in tech, from global privacy and cybersecurity to U.S. immigration policy. And Chinese internet companies face a new reality after Donald Trump's surprise victory. And Alibaba has the most to lose. We'll hear from Alibaba President Mike Evans ahead. First to our lead and market reaction following the U.S. presidential election. We saw one of the biggest single-day reversals in stock market history. The Dow Jones Industrial Average ending Wednesday just shy of a record close. Yet a handful of tech stocks missed out on the rally. Amazon, Microsoft, and Facebook shares all dropped amid speculation of what a Trump presidency would mean for them. We broke it all down with Abe Lamba, an analyst at Mizuho Securities, as well as Bloomberg's global head of tech coverage, Brad Stone, and Keith Raboy of Khosla Ventures.
Well, I don't think anybody really knows with any degree of confidence. Trump took very different positions all across the last 18 months, and anybody even close to him that tells you will admit that they don't know exactly what he really believes. So it's going to be an interesting 4 years. Obviously, the Republicans won at all levels in the government, and that's a little bit more predictable, like what the Republican congressmen stand for, what Republican senators will stand for, what Republican governors will do. So we should see less taxation, less regulation. Improvement in flexibility for tech startups basically is the highlight, because government constrains the innovation of technology, and there should be a degree of freedom that we haven't seen in a while.
That said, a lot of uncertainty, especially around actual policy initiatives. Brad, of course, we know he feuded with Jeff Bezos, the CEO of Amazon, on Twitter.
That's right, and he said he would block the AT&T Time Warner merger. I mean, the paradox is that he campaigned as a populist, but he's a Republican, and he has surrounded himself with pro-business Republicans like Jeff Sessions and Chris Christie. And so you don't know how much to take him on his campaign trail word. He said at one point that Apple needs to bring manufacturing back to the U.S., right? I mean, and these are things that really aren't even in the president's control. On the other hand, he's talked about repatriation for overseas capital. He's talked about lowering the corporate tax rate. And these are things that maybe Silicon Valley likes, so we'll have to see.
Apple, interestingly, ended up the day actually slightly up. Abe, you actually wrote that Trump could be good for tech companies in the long term. Tell us what you mean.
Not exactly in those terms, but what I meant was that if we get the tax repatriation, that helps a lot of the tech companies. If you look at, you talked about Apple. Apple has more than $100 billion stashed away outside of the U.S. You look at tech companies, large tech companies, they've probably, I don't have the exact numbers, but probably have more than $1 trillion stashed outside of the U.S. So when that comes in, where does that go? Probably goes into investing in the business, but you can't invest that kind of money back into the business. It's going to probably go into buybacks. It's probably going to go into M&A. So there's going to be a lot of companies. We saw good pace of M&A this year that can accelerate next year as we get more money back into the country. You could get buybacks, which investors like, so that can help the stocks for some of the companies like that of Apple. You could get more dividends. So a lot of those activities can come out of these decisions.
Now, while most of Silicon Valley doubled down on Hillary Clinton, there was somebody, Peter Thiel, who doubled down on Donald Trump. Take a listen to what Peter Thiel had to say about why he supported Donald Trump. Listen up.
I certainly don't support, the specific language Trump has used in every instance. But I think, I think one thing that should be made distinguished here is that, the media always is taking Trump literally. It never takes him seriously, but it always takes him literally. I think a lot of the voters who vote for Trump take Trump seriously, but not literally.
Thiel's comments about taking Trump seriously but not literally have been repeated over and over again over the last several hours as people have been digesting the results. At the same time, you had so many people in Silicon Valley coming out viscerally attacking Donald Trump. Reid Hoffman told me it would be, a terrifying disaster. Shervin Pishavar, the venture capitalist, saying Hitler was basically elected. He's funding a secession campaign. Sam Altman of Y Combinator saying, tonight we cry, we despair, we fear. Keith, what does this mean for the actual relationship between Silicon Valley and the White House? Do you think there could be retaliation?
Well, absolutely. Donald Trump is vindictive. There's no doubt about it. I mean, you look at, he was running a general election campaign and still talking about like lying Ted and low energy Jeb. He's Nixon-esque. I mean, I grew up, when I was really young and sort of picked up on some of the fears people had about Nixon's retaliation. And there's almost no doubt that the Trump administration will retaliate against the partisan involvement of a lot of tech companies. A lot of tech companies went way out on a limb, well beyond what a normal Fortune 500 company would ever do.
Jeff Bezos, Eric Schmidt, Sheryl Sandberg.
This is crazy. This is actually pretty crazy. Like, I think they're going to learn the lessons. There's a reason why Wall Street is not actively hostile to Democrats. They give a lot of money to Democrats, even though the interests of Wall Street are very different than the Democratic Party. I think basically technology companies are going to learn to grow up, that they can't take partisan opinions without consequences, and Trump is going to be the one who delivers the hammer.
Brad, 8 years have been spent building a relationship, a bridge between the White House and Silicon Valley, the U.S. Digital Service, all of these tech leaders going to Washington, talking about important issues. Will all that work be undone?
Oh, that bridge the smoke is rising. The Silicon Valley embraced President Obama. It was, maybe Keith is the exception, but your credibility as a venture capitalist almost depended on the photograph of you and President Obama that you had in your office lobby. And, Donald Trump doesn't even have email, right? I mean, he hasn't embraced tech. So the future of all those initiatives, I think, is in doubt. And I think the community has to get serious now. And maybe a Trump administration does too, about rebuilding the relationship.
Keith, you're close friends with Peter. You obviously worked with him for many years. In fact, you were his right-hand man at PayPal. Does Peter Thiel become the center of the Silicon Valley White House connection? How does Peter Thiel, even though he has won here, rebuild the bridges between all, with all the people who despise the decision that he made?
Well, I think now he's going to look like a genius. I mean, as I've always said, I've known Peter for 29 years. He's half brilliant, half crazy, and the art is discriminating between the two. He took an asymmetric bet, and it's going to pay significant dividends for him. I mean, I suspect he actually winds up going to Washington and winds up with a substantial appointment and a lot of power.
He didn't see himself doing that, but
yeah, I mean, you don't want to say that until you get nominated.
Interesting. You think he could actually work for someone else?
Yes, I mean, I think as chairman of the Fed, Treasury Secretary, those kind of positions would be very appealing, and I think he would accept them. And there's a lot of people who owe him a lot in Washington. Politics works that way. You take a bet, you take a controversial bet, and you get paid.
Interesting. Abe, last question to you. What does this mean for jobs? Obviously, the tech industry has been blamed for eliminating jobs, building this future built on AI and robots where jobs are eliminated. Now Donald Trump is saying, coal miners, don't worry. What does it mean for jobs?
Essentially, if you look at the tech companies, right, when you have jobs at the cutting edge of technology, they're still in the U.S. and they're going to remain here, and they're going to invest more in that. So that's where it all depends. I think tax relief on cash repatriation would be really good for the industry over here. Now, when you said I meant Trump was good for the tech industry or the market, I didn't mean it in that way. I just meant it. Can't make me sit next to Keith and have me say that I said it was good. But what I would say is that it was some of these decisions that are related to giving some tax relief, tax benefits to the country, can create jobs, and that would be good for the industry in general.
That was Abe Lamba, an analyst at Mizuho Securities, Bloomberg Global Head of Tech, Brad Stone, and Keith Raboy of Khosla Ventures. Still to come, the presidential election sent record traffic through social media sites, but Facebook and Twitter have also been blamed for the rise of political divisiveness. Whose responsibility is it? More on that story ahead. Plus, after a presidential campaign filled with hacking and privacy concerns, what's to come under the leadership of Donald Trump? We'll talk global cybersecurity. This is Bloomberg. Twitter COO Adam Bain is leaving the social media company. Bain built Twitter's business model, and his departure comes as the company tries to address slowing revenue growth. In a statement, Twitter says CFO Anthony Noto will shift to Bain's job, and that is now searching for a new finance chief. Twitter's ad growth has slowed in recent quarters, hampered by the site's stagnant user numbers. Now back to the U.S. election. Turns out one of the biggest losers of the campaign was polling. Almost all the pollsters, political insiders, predictive models had Hillary Clinton strolling into the White House. Popular polling sites like Nate Silver's 538 showed Clinton with a 73% chance of taking it all, and that was one of the more conservative assessments. So how did big data get it so wrong? Khosla Ventures' Keith Raboy joined us, as well as Reddit CEO Steve Huffman and CrowdPack's Steve Hilton, who was the former policy director for UK Prime Minister David Cameron.
There are two types of big failure on the data front in this election. First of all, in the polling. The polling models basically missed two big groups of voters. One was the secret Trump voters. Those could be people who basically were going to support Trump, but in response to the moral shaming that was going on by many on the other side saying if you support Trump, you're a bigot and a racist and a xenophobe, they basically didn't want to admit it. And then the second type of voter that they missed were those who actually were invisible previously because they had not participated in politics, because they didn't believe that any vote they made would make a difference. And so they were the new Trump voters who voted for the first time, believing he was a different kind of leader that might shake things up. But the other big failure is in the turnout. And this was the real heart, I think, of what went wrong with the Clinton campaign, which is that they had this incredibly sophisticated, data-driven machine built to turn out the vote in very, very specific ways in specific places. But it turns out that if you don't have a message and a leader that people really believe in, all the sophisticated data in the world won't get you the result that you want.
Steve, do you think that some of those voters were on Reddit?
I'm sure they were on Reddit. And I think while clearly there's methodology issues with the polls that were done, if you spent any time on Reddit in the last year, last night's results weren't entirely surprising. We have a lot of users that support both candidates, but the users for Donald Trump or the Donald Trump supporters on Reddit were much more engaged than other users on our site. We saw on average users or Donald Trump supporters vote 6 times more often on Reddit than supporters of other candidates. So that engagement, I'm sure, translated directly to turnout into the results last night.
Okay.
If the product's broken, marketing can't fix it. So the Democrats have a superior marketing machine, but the product wasn't as good.
Steve Hilton, how do they make sure this doesn't happen again?
By they, you mean
For the next 4 years, exactly.
I honestly
mean,
I don't know.
everyone was shocked.
But it's interesting because almost every election you see this going on now with the polls saying, oh, they got it wrong this way, they got it wrong that way. I think that for the reasons that you give, the way people are engaging now with each other in society, they're much more fluid in their views. I just wonder whether the whole thing is actually out of date. One thing I would say is that there is a way of looking at the failure of the marketing machine in a positive way, not necessarily in terms of the outcome. I'm not making a judgment about that. But if we do go to a world where actually it's not just about grinding out the vote through incredibly sophisticated targeting and a sort of soulless mechanistic approach, that it actually forces candidates to really inspire people and to develop a plan that people really can believe in, and they're not just reliant on these data-driven techniques, that might lead to a more healthier political system all round.
Now, Brexit was in part driven by concerns around immigration, concerns around jobs and trade, which we believe is similar to why Trump got elected. Immigration is something that people in Silicon Valley feel very strongly about. Google, Tesla, Elon Musk, these are huge companies that were created by immigrants. What do we think the election of Donald Trump actually means for immigration and the impact that will have on Silicon Valley?
So I have a sort of contrarian view here. I believe actually the election will cause more immigration and a relaxation of immigration. So if you go back about a decade ago, there was a lot of consensus in DC to increase the amount of skilled immigration to the United States. So allow anybody who has like a PhD, anybody who has a technical degree to immigrate pretty freely from all around the world here. And then for a variety of political reasons that may or may not make sense, the Democrats, Obama particularly, linked it to immigration from Mexico under what's called comprehensive immigration reform. And I think what you're going to see is those two policies resplit back apart. And so the Republicans in Congress will pass bills that allow people who have skilled degrees to immigrate freely to the United States. And then there's going to be a more controversial discussion about what to do about immigrants from low-skilled countries.
But hasn't Trump said he wants to end the H-1B visa program, which allows skilled workers to come in? And what would that mean for a company like Reddit, which, you know, obviously you've got a lot of engineers from other countries?
It's true. You know, one of the dimensions on which we compete with other companies is on talent. And so that means we need access to the best talent there exists in the world. And we've lost candidates because of the H-1B process. So I know it's complex now. I hope Keith is right, because that's an area where we always need to do better.
Steve, what are your thoughts on this as someone who worked in the UK for many years?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is from a policy point of view, this is something that we wrestle with, because the impact of high levels of low-skilled immigration on working people is really tough. And that's really a serious thing that you can't just ignore and sweep aside, because it benefits particular parts of the economy where it's not a problem. So I think getting that balance right will be something that they have to strike. But I think that I've heard him talk about things like, for example, the craziness of educating people at universities like Stanford and then exporting them to other countries instead of building their businesses here. I've heard Trump say that. So I think that while it's not at all clear exactly the direction that's going to be taken, I think there are grounds for optimism.
We kept the conversation going with Reddit CEO Steve Huffman and Khosla Ventures' Keith Raboy and got their take on the role social media played in the U.S. presidential election. Take a listen.
What technology does and has done for 30 years is remove the role of gatekeepers and intermediaries. This is from travel and eliminating travel agents to eliminating other third parties that get in the way. And now media doesn't have the role where it can screen and filter, because people are going to talk to each other directly, whether they do it on Reddit or on Twitter. And that's going to change the conversation, because the people who used to control the conversation and structure the conversation and decide what was in and out of bounds don't exist anymore. And that's going to fundamentally change the rules of the road, the kinds of policy debates, the people that participate in politics, and the people who win. This isn't unusual. When I was in history class growing up, we would talk about the Nixon-Kennedy debate in 1960 and how Kennedy probably won the election because Nixon was sweating too much during a debate, which is a ridiculous way to choose a president. But that's what's taught canonically in U.S. history. And anytime you have a new platform, people who adopt to that platform and people who don't adopt to the platform are going to thrive, and people who don't are going to suffer. And so you're seeing the first social media president, but that's going to change the way all campaigns are run.
That said, there's an argument to be made that Facebook is making more editorial decisions than it would admit. You know, Mark Zuckerberg has said we're a tech company, we're not a media company. But I saw one article today that said Facebook is harming our democracy and they should admit it. You know, if you think about the fact that so much of the news that we're reading we see via Facebook, and that Facebook prioritizes that information, yes, based on an algorithm built by humans and shows us things that people are engaging most with, sometimes those things are clickbaity, are misinformed, are plain wrong or inaccurate, and that's what people are watching and reading, unfortunately, on Facebook.
I think what you're seeing is not Facebook choosing the news. Social platforms like Reddit, Facebook, Twitter, the users are choosing the news. And what the internet gives you now and these platforms gives you is the ability to choose what you hear and with whom you discuss it.
But does Facebook have a greater responsibility to curate that news or to filter that news, or especially if the news is, quite frankly, wrong?
I think our role to play as platforms on the internet is to facilitate the access to this information. That's what we do best. And so the users can choose what they want to see, and that's ultimately what they're going to do.
Reddit co-founder and CEO Steve Huffman and Khosla Ventures' Keith Raboy. We will be digging into global cybersecurity. Donald Trump now holds the reins over the NSA. So what will privacy policy look like under his leadership? We'll break it down next. This is Bloomberg. GoPro shares tumbled as much as 10% in Wednesday trading after the company said it is recalling about 2,500 of its new Karma drones. A small number of the new devices have been losing their power mid-flight. GoPro says no injuries or property damage have been reported, and owners can return the units for a full refund. GoPro stock has already plunged 40% this year. The recall deal is another blow to the company's already dim prospects for the holiday season. Well, after months of campaigning, Donald Trump overcame all odds and became the 45th president-elect of the United States. The new position comes with a number of responsibilities, including control of the NSA. This was a presidential campaign filled with hacking, primarily focused on the Democratic Party. Red Owl Analytics COO Brian White joined us along with Keith Raboy of Coastal Ventures to discuss just what privacy and cybersecurity will look like under President-elect Trump. Take a listen.
The reality is, I think that first we can all take a deep breath. There's probably not going to be an enormous amount of change. But I do think we can look to two things. One is, what he has said is he wants to put a task force in place to look at these issues. That's what he's put on his website. And that can be expected of any candidate. And I think the second is that there could be more offensive activity. And that is probably the one that we need to watch closely, because particularly post-Russia, which I know you're going to bring up at some point, is that there have been some retaliations of late. At least that's been reported in the press. Will he continue
What kind of
that?
retaliation?
What's been reported in the press is that we've gained access to their infrastructure. And so the question is, will that continue? Will he want to use cyber offense more often than has been used in the past? Will he be more disclosing of those capabilities? I think that's where the unknown is.
So you're saying the U.S. is going to hack Russia now?
No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that what has been reported in the press is that the U.S. has, tried to retaliate for what seems to have transpired with the WikiLeaks. And so the question that I think is on the table in regards to President Trump and what may transpire going forward is, how will he use cyber offense? That is an interesting question, much more than necessarily privacy, because I don't see him making much of an impact in that.
Do you worry for your safety, for our safety?
I do. I mean, if you've looked at presidents before, like Nixon clearly abused some of his powers, and God forbid he had some of the powers that President Trump will inherit. I think there's going to be a lot of fans suddenly converted into the form of the believing in limited government. There's been a lot of Democrats and liberals that have been ignoring the concepts of a constitution and constitutional limits and limits on the executive branch. And Obama's pushed very far on that dimension. And I think there's going to be a consensus to pull back what the executive branch is allowed to do, which is probably a healthy thing.
So let's talk a little bit about Russia. Of course, President Putin congratulated Donald Trump on his win. Brian, how much do you think the hack on the Democrats, WikiLeaks, how much do you think that actually influenced the outcome of the election?
I mean, I'll leave that to the political prognosticators. What I'll stick on is security. What was interesting about it, as General Hayden has noted, is the fact that it looks like a foreign intelligence service went ahead and partnered with an organization such as WikiLeaks to disclose the information.
And got away with it thus far.
Appears that way.
Or accomplished what they had hoped.
Well, I mean, I think that is where the speculation comes in, which will lead to the prognosticators. What we should focus on is what that means going forward. And I think that's partly what we'll continue to see, which is cyber will be used increasingly as a tool. We already know it is a tool of economic espionage. We already know that people are being targeted inside organizations to take sensitive data, because the reality is that somebody that is internal has access. And that's what we saw with the John Podesta leaks, is they were gaining information there, and they knew who to target, they knew how to target. What we really saw there is that can happen more and more.
The U.S. relationship with Russia has been incredibly tense. Keith, what do you make of a potentially friendlier future? What does that really mean for us?
I'm not sure being friends with Russia under the current leadership is a good idea. He'll probably be accused of being Mitt Romney in 2012. But I think, Russia has some bad ideas, and somebody needs to stand up to them. I don't know if that'll be Donald Trump, but hopefully it'll be the Republican Congress.
Could Trump force companies to hand over more personal data?
Yeah, I mean, first, I'm glad you asked that, because I think that's the interesting question. What it appears as if is that he's going to be much more pro-law enforcement, so he could be much more aggressive going forward. I think we have to remember that there are still other branches of government that need to be engaged to enable him to continue to be more aggressive. I mean, he would have to get a subpoena approved to gain access. I do think this is where an idea such as Senator Warner and Congressman McCall's commission to study encryption further comes in. And I could see that gaining some legs, but I think of all the priorities he has coming up, going after and changing the way encryption is in this country, I would say that's probably not going to be at the top of the list.
Coming up, we head to Shenzhen, China, and speak with Alibaba President Mike Evans. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio. You can now listen on the Bloomberg Radio app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on SiriusXM. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to the best of Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang. This week, Alibaba held its annual Singles Day Shop-a-thon, a 24-hour spending blitz that dwarfs Black Friday and Cyber Monday in the U.S. The event has become somewhat of a barometer of Chinese consumer sentiment, offering clues on the health of the Chinese economy and its largest online retailer. And investors took notice. We caught up with Alibaba President Mike Evans live from Shenzhen, China, as the action was underway. Take a listen.
Well, it's highly unlikely that we'll continue to grow at 60% each year because the absolute number is becoming so large that would be very, very difficult to do. But as you can see, we're at least 30+% higher than we were last year, and it looks like we'll end up somewhere between $17 and $18 billion of total GMV. Bear in mind that that's against a 9% depreciation in the renminbi, so that takes quite a lot out of the dollar number. So it'll be more like 33 or 34% from a renminbi standpoint. But the real opportunity is that we're only today penetrating about 10% of the China retail market online, and so there's huge potential growth in that China market, together with everything that we're planning to do as part of our globalization initiative. So we see substantial further opportunity for growth in the future.
Now, Mike, President-elect Trump has said he's going to end trade agreements around the world. Alibaba Chair Joe Tsai has urged him not to adopt an isolationist doctrine. You worked at Goldman Sachs for so many years. You travel the world. What would a Trump presidency and some of these policies he is indicating, what would that mean for Alibaba and for China?
Look, I approach this from a fairly pragmatic standpoint. China's a great country. The United States is a great country. That's speaking as a Canadian. There's not a citizen or a resident of either. The most important thing is that these are the two largest economies in the world. And for them to work together is what will be necessary, not only for the benefit of the two countries, but for the rest of the world. And I am highly confident that that's the direction that both countries will head.
That said, Bloomberg reported that Trump's trade policies might pose the biggest threat to Alibaba of all the Chinese tech giants. I mean, how would Alibaba respond to potential trade tariffs, sanctions, even in a very extreme case, a trade war?
Well, remember, Emily, that the way that we're currently set up is that we don't actually sell that much product into the United States. But if you want to know who the #1 beneficiary is of 11/11 and our global shopping festival this year, the U.S. has the largest number of brands that are selling products to the Chinese consumer and to other consumers around the world. #1, ahead of all other countries. It's hard for me to understand or hard for me to imagine a reason why we wouldn't want that to continue. It's great for brands. It's great for retailers like Macy's and Costco. It's fantastic for job creation, wealth creation, and all the things that Trump and many presidents are focused on.
Now, the SEC has been looking into Singles Day data that you reported last year. How are you changing your accounting practices as a result of that?
We're not changing our accounting practices. We think that the way that we present our numbers, whether it's in Singles Day or whether it's in our regular quarter reports, is accurate and in accordance with the rules and the regulations. The SEC sent us a letter some time ago. We're fully cooperating with the SEC. We've improved our disclosure because investors find it useful. We covered that in a very large Investor Day presentation several months ago. We feel very good about what we're doing. People have asked us, how do we account for the GMV that's generated during 11/11? We have a prescribed procedure by our independent auditors, PwC, where we record the sales through Ant Financial and Alipay, and any recorded sale that is a result that generates GMV is in the numbers, and then we follow the procedures that have been put in place by PwC. So we feel very good about our numbers.
Mike, you're the guy who's in charge of increasing Alibaba's global presence. Any chance that Singles Day might be held outside of China, perhaps as early as next year?
Jack was just asked that question a few minutes ago when he was addressing the Chinese media. He said that at some point in the future, he fully expected to do that. But Emily, we have a huge job ahead of us to connect so many great brands from developed markets and from around the world to Chinese consumers. And as you know, one of my big focuses, the rest of Asia, India, and Southeast Asia. That's going to take many years to accomplish.
That was Alibaba President Mike Evans from Shenzhen, China. Coming up, our conversation with Walt Disney CEO Bob Iger You don't want to miss this one. And a reminder, all episodes of Bloomberg Tech are now live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Bloomberg Tech TV weekdays, 6 p.m. in New York, 3 p.m. in San Francisco. This is Bloomberg. Walt Disney came out with earnings on Thursday. The company's been facing pressure on the revenue front and its ESPN subscriber numbers. Bloomberg Daybreak America's anchor David Weston caught up with Disney CEO Bob Iger right after the company reported. Take a listen.
14 and 15 had been record years for us, and we did even better in 16. So we continue to grow the company at a robust clip. In addition to that, the two biggest things that we had to accomplish in fiscal 16 was, one, bring Star Wars back. Our first movie, Force Awakens, came out in December, the first one since the acquisition of Lucas, and it was just a gigantic success. Over $2.1 billion in global box office, third highest grossing movie of all time, and a critical success as well. And the second thing we had to do was to open up the biggest, most ambitious project that we've ever embarked on, and that was building Disneyland in Shanghai. We opened on June 16th. I'm proud to say that after 4 months of operation, 4 million people visited the park, and they're loving what they have experienced. And the prospects for that park in the most populous country in the world, I think, are really bright. Biggest investment that we've made outside the United States. It shows, by the way, in the product. It's great product, high quality, very entertaining, very original, and being very well received. So first 4 months, 4 million visitors. That did include the peak summer months. So we said on the call that people could infer, if you factor in that peak, those peak months, that should result in about 10 million visitors for the first year. By the way, we'd be happy with that number, but we're not providing guidance there. What we can say is that about 50% of the people that are visiting come from outside of the Shanghai region. That's a big surprise to us. We thought it was going to be well above 75% initially that came from Shanghai. And the fact that it's so balanced leads us to believe that word of mouth on this and the intent to visit from well beyond Shanghai is very, very high. So this has become suddenly not a local product, but a national product in China, a national tourist destination, which is what Shanghai is. That's really positive.
Well, Bob, as you suggest, one of the strengths of your company is the range of assets you have. So if one starts to miss a little bit, you've got another one to come on with a hit. But I think it's fair to say the media networks have gotten a lot of attention, particularly ESPN, frankly, in part because it's so successful and so large. But there are questions about the subscriber level for ESPN and some reduction in the subscribers. Can you bring us up to speed on where that stands right now? At what rate are you losing subscribers? Is that continuing?
Look, we've been eyes wide open, I'll call it, about what's going on in the television business overall. We've seen a lot of disruption. People are consuming TV on new platforms in very, very different ways, in new places as well. Mobile has become really important, for instance. We were candid a year ago about what we had been seeing at the time regarding ESPN subs. We've been seeing losses. A lot of it came from the adoption of cable light bundles that did not have ESPN in them. We decided that we would embark on a campaign, so to speak, to make sure that ESPN was included in any new light bundles that launched, and we've been quite successful at negotiating deals with distributors, particularly a lot of new distributors, to make sure that ESPN is included in the new packages that are coming out. So we are heartened by, one, a slight abatement in the loss of subs due to light bundles, two, the launching of these new digital platforms, which we think provide a great user interface and are very mobile friendly. We know ESPN is a great hand as it relates to their programming. We know that live sports is still really popular. And so while there are some challenges that are due to some of the disruption that we've seen, we actually believe that there are some solutions or some answers to some of the questions that people have had about what's going on with ESPN, and we feel good about our prospects.
With the AT&T Time Warner deal, the old question about do you need to own the distribution in addition to the content is brought back full center. Does Disney need to own the distribution of those digital platforms or not?
It's interesting because I look at the AT&T Time Warner merger, planned merger, as a distribution company needing to own content. as opposed to a content company needing to own distribution. I'm not going to comment on whether those synergies work or not, except that to me, it echoes what we've seen, you've seen, I've seen for many, many years, and that is content is king. If you're a distribution platform today and you don't have great content, you better figure that out, because the consumer is interested far more in content than they are in how they get that content, although that's important too. For Disney, what we really would like to accomplish, and we see as a great opportunity, is how do we get closer to our customer? There are these tools that exist today that mine user data that do two things. They improve the user experience because of customization, personalization, more tailored, more contextual programming in advertising. And it also gives the distributor or the owner of the content an opportunity to monetize under more compelling circumstances. So one of the reasons why we made the investment in BAMTech that we did is we like the play of BAMTech in the sense that it is one avenue that gets us closer to the customer and gives us the ability to mine that data, sell directly, and grow our business. And we're going to continue to look with an open mind expansively at those opportunities. Well, do we have to own distribution? No, not as a company. We're doing quite well without it. Would we like to have the kind of distribution that solves the problem or provides us with the opportunity that I just described? Yes, we would.
So, Bob, one of your strengths as a CEO is you've always believed in going to scale. You don't like to do things in a small way. You mentioned the BAMTech investment. It's $1 billion, and it's a substantial company. But is BAMTech alone enough to take you to scale, or do you need something more to really take you to scale in this new distribution area of digital?
Very good question. Don't know the answer to that. It's a start. It's a step in the direction of achieving scale. Whether it gets us to the kind of scale we need or not, I think it's premature to answer that question since we haven't launched the ESPN branded product on it yet. But it's an important step.
Bob, this has been a remarkable week, not only because of the Walt Disney Company earnings, but also because we elected a new president that surprised a lot of people. It's early going, but I know the way you plan ahead. What are your first thoughts about how President Trump could affect the Walt Disney Company?
Well, first of all, I think that so far so good in terms of what I'll call transition, even though it's very, very early. I think both the president-elect, I was going to say the candidate, he's no longer the candidate, president-elect and President Obama have approached this really smartly. Be cordial, be open, understand that the most important thing here is America, not one party or another, not one ideology or another. And so let's be gentlemen about it, and that's what they're doing. That's great for the country. For the country to see that, it just instills confidence in our country and faith that the future is good, even if your ideology is not necessarily represented in the next president of the United States. So I like what I've seen so far, and I think the country's reacting well to it.
You're a student of the media. I mean, you've lived your entire professional career in the media. You know it and you love it. It's not too soon, I think, to start asking ourselves the question of the role of the media in this election. I mean, it strikes me that this is a very different media than was in existence even 4 years ago, certainly 8 years ago. And certainly Donald Trump took full advantage of that, both in terms of being able to get access, particularly on the cable channels, but also in social media. Is the media starting to think about its role in future elections and what role it should be playing as the fourth estate?
There's a lot of hand-wringing about the media this week and its role in the election. And I think that hand-wringing is missing the point. And the point it's missing is that the media today doesn't look anything like the media of yesterday. We're living in a world where the sheer definition of media, and I'm talking about not the definition of what the industry creates, but the definition that the people create, is extremely different than what it used to be. How we get our news, what we consider news, how information travels, how fast it travels, it's vastly different. So I would argue that the media actually played a positive role in this campaign in the sense that it was ever present, which media is today. It was sort of eyes on, cameras on, voices about everything that went on. Everything was exposed. Everything was subject to scrutiny by the new media. That can't be a bad thing. Now, did the media get it right in terms of predicting the outcome? No. I think that deserves some scrutiny by the media, and how did they get it wrong? But I don't think the manner in which the campaign was covered is necessarily something that deserves criticism. You know, you can always be reflective about it. That's fine. I think there's nothing harmful about that. But what is media today? It doesn't look anything like it did certainly 5 years ago, 10 years ago, when I started my career at ABC 42 years ago. It's just different. And I think it's time that those that follow the media from a critical perspective accept the fact that the media they are following today is vastly different than the media they used to follow, or maybe than they think they're following.
Bloomberg Daybreak America's anchor David Weston interviewing Disney CEO Bob Iger there. One stock that did get a boost from Donald Trump's win is Sprint. Investors see a less restrictive merger environment under the new administration. President-elect Trump will be in charge of nominating new leaders in agencies like the FCC and the Justice Department, which had previously favored a four-player wireless market in the U.S. and had blocked Sprint's merger with T-Mobile. Still ahead, our interview with BlackBerry CEO John Chen, his thoughts on what a Trump win means for business. This is Bloomberg. The alternative energy industry saw a drop this week after the election of Donald Trump. That's because Trump is a longtime climate change denier who has vowed to undo clean energy initiatives promoted by President Obama. Tesla shares slid off the news along with SolarCity, Sunrun, and SunPower. All of this 1 week before Tesla and SolarCity shareholders vote to approve a $2 billion merger. Well, business leaders throughout tech have been reacting to what a Trump presidency might mean for their sectors. I had the chance to sit down for an exclusive interview with BlackBerry CEO John Chen at the Techonomy Conference in Half Moon Bay, California, and began by asking what a Trump win means for BlackBerry and for business. Listen up.
This really came out of nowhere. So the reaction is, it's pretty shocking.
So what does it mean for BlackBerry? What does it mean for business?
Actually, I mean, I am an optimist, so I think about it from a good side. You know, the way I feel about it is, it's reality. It happened, so we need to make the best out of it. And I think if Trump, nobody really knows what he's going to do next, but if Trump's really for pro-business and a small government, less regulatory, I think it will actually be good. You know, for not only the tech industry, for banking and many different industries. Right? So I would suggest that it very much depends on who he taps, at people that surround him and support him, and I hope they are moderates.
Now, I know you're a registered Republican. You worked with President Bush for a time. You said a few months ago you're an immigrant and you don't know if you could vote for Trump. What did you decide to do in the end? Who did you vote for?
I'm not going to tell anybody what I did, now, given the sensitivity of that. But I remain truthful to the fact that I think being immigrant, it was problematic.
And given that so much of the technology industry is built on immigrants and skilled workers who come from other countries, how do you think President Trump could impact the workforce? I actually, you know, again, you know, I could be absolutely wrong. I think his position are more deal-driven, and the reason why the H-1B visa issues had never cleared the Congress is because everybody at Washington wants to kind of link this to this legalize the illegal immigrant issues. So he never got through the voting process. And Trump said he'll end the H-1B.
Well, as I said, I think people said a lot of things that in the political process, election process, and I think it's impractical to end H-1B. I think it will really hurt the country in a very profound way. I mean, if he sit down and look at Stack, and I hope he is a businessman enough to do so, then he will know that, you know, ending H-1B will really hurt literally across the board for all the tech industry, biotech, IT, all the tech. So you know, I hope that we don't get to that point.
President George W. Bush appointed you to the President's Export Council. You advised him on U.S.-China relations. You've spoken before Congress on these issues. How do you think President Trump will impact U.S.-China relations?
Oh, that's an interesting thing. I think that the beginning will be rocky. I also do believe that it gives an opportunity to restart a different type of narrative and a dialogue. It might not be as bad at the end because, you know, we've been running the same framework with U.S.-China. We call it containment. They call it containment, and we call it a different thing. We've been running that dialogue for better than 1 decade or more. I think that Trump, he indicated, by the way, on his website that one of the top priorities is going to declare China as a currency manipulator. That's what he said, okay? Now, no president had done that, Democrats or Republicans. So if he had done that, if he actually go do it, it will going to really create a lot of tension. And I think the Chinese and us will sit down and will work those things out. At the end of that, it might surprise all of us that it might be, quote unquote, a better deal for both ends. So I'm again, I hope I'm not overly optimistic.
In what way could it be a better deal?
Well, I mean, China we do have a problem in opening and broadening our reach in a Chinese market, for example. In fact, it's starting to go back the old way of being more protective. Maybe it's the economic drivers, maybe it's a lot of different things. I think there might be an opportunity there. We're gonna have to look at it that way because you know, as I said, it's reality.
He said he'll end a number of trade pacts, free trade pacts. And with China in particular, there's concerns that on the very extreme case, it could lead to a trade war with China. How likely do you think a trade war?
I don't think so likely. It hurts everybody. I'm sorry to say this, but I don't think anybody is that dumb. You know, what do I know, right? But if you want to be logical, you want to be a business person, you look at the well-being of everybody, including your own people. Ending trade war in a globalized systems that way we have today, it is absolutely devastating, to say the least. It will put the whole world into a recession that probably is going to be very hard to get out. You know, we don't have any more weapons left. You know, the ease of funds and all that, they're done. We got deflationary mood in most other places. There are no growth around the world. Starting a trade war right now is the worst time that could possibly happen.
My exclusive interview with BlackBerry Chairman and CEO John Chen there. And that does it for this edition of the Best of Bloomberg Technology. We will bring you all the latest in tech throughout the week. And remember, tune in for our latest episode of Bloomberg Studio 1.0. YouTube CEO Susan Wojcicki joins us, just as YouTube passes its 10-year mark of Google's $1.65 billion acquisition. This is Bloomberg.